sights faced Grand Square. Lido missed the boat that day. He left the shack, but that was all he missed, 'cause he ain't coming back. Left that old man weave the rag at a Tombstone bar in a juke joint car. He made a stop just long enough to grab a handle off the top.
All right, here we go. Another Square Dance Callers Talking. Tonight, I'm in New Jersey. I have got Mark Franks with me tonight. How are you, sir?
I am good. How are you? Thank you for asking me on.
Absolutely, sir. It's a pleasure meeting you. Pleasure talking to you. So you've been Square Dance calling for a long time. We haven't had the opportunity to meet yet, but we ran across each other through Facebook, email, and that type of thing. And so we're going to do this tonight. We want to talk about you. First of all, you're Mark Franks. Where exactly do you live in New Jersey?
So I live in Ocean View, we're about 3 miles south of Ocean City.
Okay.
So we're right on the Atlantic Ocean. Although I don't have an ocean view from my house, I can get there very quickly. So
Okay.
spend a lot of time. At one point I was running. I ran a half marathon last year, so I did a lot of my training in Ocean City. So I got to run on the boardwalk. So
Wow.
got to see the boardwalk every day. And I did my long run trainings I did in Ocean City, because the half marathon was in Atlantic City, but it was in October. So the shore towns, pretty much by the beginning of October, everybody has left. They've all gone home back to their
Sure.
home states. So I pretty much ran most of Ocean City.
Very nice. Now, is running something you've done your whole life, or when that started?
About 2.5 years ago, we had gone skiing, and my daughter tore her ACL. So she went through the rehab, and she decided after all the rehab that she wanted to run a 5K. And she does not like running. I never liked running. I played soccer in high school. I didn't mind running during the game, but the running that we had to do before the game, or in practice, I had no desire to do whatsoever.
Okay. Very nice.
So she ran her 5K, and I was like, well, if you can do it, I can do it. So she ran hers in November in Stone Harbor, which is about 10 miles south of us, but literally the run is right on the streets parallel with the ocean.
Okay.
So I started training, and we had my first 5K was in April of 2023, and it was a benefit for the Cape May County Zoo. So we actually ran part of the race through the zoo and past the animals and all that. So that was pretty cool. And I actually had to call a dance 2.5 hours north that night. So I did the 5K, and I came home and I took a nap, and then I went and did my dance.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of running myself. I've done it in the past. I try and avoid it at all costs. But at some point you have to do it. Trying to stay in some kind of shape as we get older, and we all are. It never fails.
Yes, we are.
Well, sir, you are a Square Dance caller. That's what brings us together tonight. First of all, let's say this before we go any further. Are you from New Jersey? Is that where you're born and raised?
I was born and raised in New Jersey. I literally live 18 miles from the house I was born in.
Amazing. Very nice. Very nice.
Although people say I have a twang, no matter when I'm calling, they're like, well, where are you from? I'm like, New Jersey. Have you lived in New Jersey your whole life? I'm like, absolutely.
From Southern New Jersey.
I don't, yeah, Southern New Jersey, but I don't get it. But a lot of people have told me that, so we'll take their word for it.
All right, Mark. Well, so when did you start dancing? How old were you? How long ago was that?
So it's a convoluted question. My parents started square dancing in 1972 is when they went through beginner class. And my parents had no desire to pay for a babysitter. And my oldest sister, Jolie, was already square dancing. She actually is who got them interested in it. She basically told my dad, she's like, hey, she square danced in the 4-H program, said, hey, you might like this square dancing. You can literally go for one time. If you don't like it, you don't have to go back again. So my parents went to the first night of class with all the kids in tow. and I was too young to dance at that point because back in the 70s, they they kind of like to have they weren't big on kids dancing with the adults. You had a lot of teen clubs, like we had the 4-H program, but even in the club that my parents ended up joining, the name of the club was Haylofters. They had Haylofters and they had junior Haylofters, but the Haylofters really didn't like dancing with the junior Haylofters per se because they were really good dancers. They would kick, stomp, twirl, and do stuff that just probably wasn't up the comfort level for the experienced dancers. So I went to class with mom and dad. I would just sit and watch. Apparently, early on in class, I started helping the caller carry in his equipment and carry out his equipment. And I would literally, while he was on the breaks, I would then start putting the music on his turntable and listen to the record during the breaks. So when they graduated, I actually, even though I didn't go through the class, I kind of by watching, I was able to dance, and I got a caller's helper badge.
Nice. Okay.
And for years later, I saw that caller. He retired from calling, and I was involved in 4-H. He was involved in the Rotary. The Rotary we had a 4-H fair every year. I think it was the Absecon Rotary ran one of the food concession booths there. So I would see him every year and we would talk in that time period. So that's how I got into dancing. The first square dance class that I ever went to was in 1984. I had started dating my girlfriend at the time, who is now my wife. I wanted to have her learn how to dance advanced. So I went through the advanced class with her. I was already dancing advanced and semi-calling advanced, but that was my first official. I went from start to finish through a class.
Okay.
And so got involved and started calling in 1980. So I've been dancing involved for about 5 to 6 years at that point. And how that basically got started was the Square Dance Club was dancing about 20 minutes from my house, and there was 2 callers that called for the club. Dave Platt was one of the callers, and he owned a furniture store in Summers Point. He actually had built a dance studio on the 2nd floor of his furniture store. So he used to run dances and weekends there, and he would bring in all the top name callers from the area. I found a schedule of his club at one of the other clubs that I danced for from like 1976, and it's like the who's who of calling from back then. Well, he had his spare records in his office. So I used to bring a record player to the dance. I would go into the office. I would play the music on the record player while the dance was going on. On the breaks, I would bring that record out and they would let me play it on the turntable in the hall. So Joe Landy was the other caller there. So he was like, well, do you want to do a singing call? What? Sure. And during that time period, the club had actually moved from where Dave Platt had the hall. They moved to a hall in Mays Landing, which was the town I grew up in. So the hall was only 9/10 of a mile from me. So I could ride my bicycle there because Dave Platt ended up running like afternoon sessions.
Yeah.
So I would ride there and he'd let me call there. And then Joe worked with me on my first singing call and then went to second singing call. And then he's like, well, are you interested in becoming a caller? I'm like, sure. So then he started the patter. And lo and behold, literally about 3 years ago, he was cleaning out his office and found a cassette tape of me calling from 1980. And it is comical to listen to. I'm 15. My voice hasn't changed yet. So I'm this high-pitched kid calling. And they always are like, you're doing great. You're doing great. And I'm listening to this thing. I'm like, how did you guys ever support me for this? It was god awful. But practice will get you there.
Yep. It's great that you had that, and to be lucky enough to find a cassette tape to hear yourself back then.
I
Um,
actually have it on. I don't know whether the computer we're doing this on is actually my calling computer. It's either on this or one of my other, my backup one. I can't remember which one it's on, but I think I played it for one of the clubs that I call for on a regular basis. I think I did play it for them one night, and they got a kick out of it.
we're losing some of that with everything that we do digital now. Unless somebody happens to record it on a phone, you're not going to stumble across an old cassette tape of yourself. So that's gold. What you have there, that's great. Um, I've got some old video that people took of me on their phone 12 years ago when I started doing patter and everything. And I listened to it. And it's the same thing. I'm like, well, how did y'all people keep dancing to me? Why did y'all even let me go back up on the stage? Because it was rough. Everybody's starting out. It's not easy. It's not an easy thing that we do. But you've been doing it for a long time. That's a great start. So you had your mentors going in and they're working with you. Do you think that you took to the patter or the singing calls first?
Oh, patter. To this day, if I never had to do with another singing call, I would be happy.
No kidding. Very nice. Okay.
So I was very lucky. The club that Joe Landy, like I said, was the person who mentored me the most with a day-to-day. They taught their square dance class on Sundays, so he generally would let me call a tip for the beginner class. And then they had an advanced workshop on Tuesday nights. So I wasn't calling advanced at that point, but I got the opportunity to practice my patter to a bunch of advanced dancers. So they were great at getting through the plus calls, and then the harder you made the plus calls, they didn't have any problem with that. And I enjoyed that portion of it from the very beginning. So I've always focused on choreography, almost to a detriment for my first 15 years of calling, because sometimes I could be brutal. Okay. And I had this mindset that I can get you through anything that I call. And the mindset was not necessarily correct.
Okay.
But the funniest story, and this goes to one story we'll talk about. So I think it was 1994, 93 or 94. Northern New Jersey runs they call a mini fest. It's a one-day festival, and they normally bring in one out-of-town caller, and they have one local caller. Now I'm still 2.5 hours south of them, so I'm not really a local caller for them. So Tony Oxendine was doing the dance that year, so I got to work with Tony, which I had been calling for 13, 14 years, but still pretty intimidating working with him for the first time. So we're doing the dance together, and what the format of the dance was, Tony and I did the first tip together, and then we pretty much didn't call again. They had a mainstream hall running and a plus hall running, and then probably an advanced hall also. So we would switch between halls, so we never worked with each other necessarily. And I think we did the opening tip. We called from like 2 to 5. I think they had an advanced or C1 tip at like 5 o'clock that Tony did. We took a dinner break, and they actually served us food there. And then we came back and called like 7 to 9. So we did the first tip together at 7 o'clock, and then we closed up the dance together. And I remember doing the singing. We did the singing call. It's a sin to tell a lie.
Okay.
And Marshall Flippo, I believe, recorded it. And if you ever had a chance to dance to Flippo, he was one of the best. It just got faster. He just kept adding words to it. So we're getting ready to do the singing call, and Tony's like, we're going to do it. It's a sin to tell a lie. I'm like, great. He's like, you do it normal. Just ignore me. He's going to jump in and out. So we do the opener. I do the opener. He does the first tip. I do the second tip. He wants me to do the middle break, and then I am literally doing it straight. Be sure it's true. You say I love you with a sin to tell a lie, and he's just doing a whole set of different words that are like alternate words to it while I'm calling. And he does not stop and take a breath, I swear, through all 64 beats of music till we get to the third figure. So that was pretty darn cool. So the first teaching moment I had in calling, and I think it was probably the thing that really changed my philosophy on calling, there was one of the dancers who was, I think, the president of Northern New Jersey Dancers Association, taped the Minifest. At this time, it's an audio tape, and he gave me a copy of it. So I got to hear Tony and I calling together, and me calling and him calling. And he was in the mainstream hall, the main hall, whatever level it was at the time. And he is calling, and he's not calling anything overly hard. Some different stuff, but nothing hard. Always, it would be either a get out to a right and a left grand or an Alaman left and a right and a left grand. And the dancers were hooping and hollering and having a great time. In my philosophy, from the time that I started, that the only time I would call a right and a left grand was a get out to a right and a left grand. I never called Alaman left and right and left grand. Why would you do that? Then I was like, well, he might be onto something. So fast forward, it might have only been 3 or 4 months. Steve Cotman was doing a caller seminar at one of the local festivals. And his whole focus on the session was calling different material, but not difficult. Do something that they're going to say, hey, I've not done that before, but not something that you're beating them into the ground.
Right.
And between listening to Tony and then having Steve say that, I kind of eventually like, they might be onto something. So I finally went away from calling hard patter to going different, but not difficult. I mean, depending on the floor. I mean, there are some floors that they want you to beat them up for 2.5 hours,
Sure.
like a DVD dance. They're not looking for easy DVD.
Mm-hmm.
So that was pretty much, I think, the focus that I had that changed how I looked at it. But funny story, going back before I changed, there's this one club that I would call for twice a year, and the club members were not, shall I say, my biggest fans because they weren't a very strong level club, but the person doing the booking for the club liked bringing me in because I brought a ton of visitors.
Right.
Well, a ton of visitors all could dance.
Good dancers, okay.
So the club benefited from having a big crowd. The club members weren't very happy, and a lot of them didn't dance half the night. But I've changed a lot over the years. Now I am definitely, I think I'm pretty good at reading floors.
Okay.
I think I'm pretty good at, okay, I can get them through this. And there's this one club that I call for. They dance every week. They have first and third Saturdays are their dance to the level of floor, and their club uses the condensed teaching method from CALLERLAB.
Yeah.
So you could go in there and they are still in CTM, so that's what you have to call. They may be in transition from, they've graduated CTM, but they haven't learned all the mainstream calls. Or they may be full mainstream at that point. So you never know going in what you're going to have. So I kind of have a list. It's not what I can call, it's more of a what I can't call. Because it's easy to remember the 17 calls or whatever the number is that you can't call in CTM, and just like SSD that you can't call, as opposed to the 50 some that you have to memorize. So I was talking to the caller that teaches the class the one night, and he was very happy with the dance. And he's like, well, how do you keep everybody happy? Because you have the new dancers who are happy and they're moving, but you're challenging the experienced dancers. And I said sometimes it's just a matter of doing something that's a little weird that everybody's on the same level at this point. It's not benefiting the experienced dancers because nothing in their knowledge base is going to help them. But for the new dancers, they don't know any different anyway. So it kind of levels the playing field. And
Sure.
so
That's outstanding.
that's pretty cool.
It is. It really is. And you have there's a fine line between challenging and fun dancing, and it depends on your floor. It really does. Especially if you're hired in as a guest caller, it's not your normal club. You know what they want typically. I
Yeah.
mean, I know what my club wants on a week-to-week basis. But yeah, and there's some that hire you because they want to be challenged, just like you said with the DVD. And so it's great that you can work through that. I mean, because it's not easy sometimes. With that being said, what level do you call to?
Well, I competently call through advanced.
Okay.
I can call C1. I can't do a dance of C1.
Okay.
I can do probably an hour's worth of C1. So I have a couple of clubs that they are advanced and challenge. So the one club, and I used to call for them years ago because they used to just be an advanced club. And
Okay.
then they went to, okay, they used to have a bunch of C1 and C2 dancers that had a different club. So they were separated. The C1, C2 club, I think, was running out of dancers. So they kind of merged with the advanced club, and then they started doing a C1 tip during the dance. Like, okay, I can do that. Short story on that one though. So I'm calling one night. The first tip is advanced. We probably have 10 squares on the floor at advanced, and I'm looking in the back of the hall and I'm like, I know that caller, but can't put two and two together. I don't know him personally. He had called on festivals. So I do my first tip, and I'll walk into the back of the hall, and he's dancing with the person that booked me. Well, apparently she had moved down to Florida, married a caller, Ben Rubright. Well, Ben was back in, I don't know whether Ben's calling anymore or not, but back in the 80s, 90s, probably 70s, 80s, and 90s, he was one of the premier advanced and challenge callers. So I'm like, oh, great. I got to call a C1 tip now with him here. So literally, I went up to him like, hey, would you like to do the C1 tip tonight? And luckily, he said no. And luckily, he wasn't there because I think we did the C1 tip at the end of the dance and he had left by then. So I don't know whether he left because my advanced was bad, so he wasn't bothering to stick for the C1, or why he left, but luckily I didn't have to do that. So fast forward about 15 years, this club now is doing an hour of C1 and 2 hours of advanced. I'm like, well, I can't call for you. I can't do an hour of C1. And I had in my mind that it was still a bunch of the C2 dancers there. I'm never going to be able to challenge them. And finally, after about 5 years of bugging me, they're like, RC1, they're really not strong dancers anymore.
Okay.
You'll be fine. So I agreed to do it. So it's actually gone pretty well. And they actually are now, it's a convoluted format, but they're doing it to try to get more interest in their challenge. So they dance 6 to 7 is C1. The first tip is a full C1 tip. The second tip is all the C1 calls that they have been taught. So the list changes every week, but they don't dance every week. So these dancers are learning C1 maybe they'll learn it 1 month and they might, if depending on what their schedule, they might not dance for another month. So right now I think they're like 17 or 18 C1 calls. So the tips 2, 3, and 4, you only call those C1.
Wow. Okay.
7 o'clock, we do a C1 teach. We teach 2 calls, which then you use the rest of the night through the advanced session. So those C1, the calls will then be tacked onto the list that they will dance from 6:15 to 7:45. So I've done that. And then there's a club about an hour south of them that is it was a caller run club, and the caller retired. So one of the dancers has taken it over and turned it into it's C1 and advanced, and occasionally they'll just do a C1 dance, which I don't do. So for that club, it's a half hour of C1 and then 2 hours of advanced. I'm like, I've written enough material that I can get through that. So that's why I competent through A2, semi-competent through C1. I did a festival 2 years ago. They're like, "Do you want to call C1?" I'm like, "Absolutely not. I am going to bore these people to death." So I've been calling advanced, I think, since 1987. I think is when I did my first advanced dance.
Okay.
I had my own advanced club for just about 20 years, and I didn't have the time to teach an advanced class at that point, so I kind of had to rely on other people teaching because the club was an hour and a half away, and we danced on Sunday nights, and crowd started dwindling. There was somebody else teaching advanced, and they would come over, but crowds were dwindling, and I'm like, my kids were at that point early teens, and I was just like, it's probably this just isn't worth being out of the house for 6 hours on a Sunday
Sure.
to make $80.
Yeah. No, I get you.
So, and I had coached soccer for some time. I played soccer in high school, and my daughter played soccer. So I was like, I want to ref soccer. My wife's like, well, you got to give up something. So between the crowd dwindling and I wanted to try refing soccer. So I folded the advanced club and refed soccer for about 7 years, and finally had knee surgery. And I was like, I'm not really missing getting yelled at.
Yeah.
I could get yelled at in my day job easy enough. I don't need to do it on the weekends also. And so I have one advanced club that I still call for second and fourth Fridays. I took them over probably about 7 or 8 years ago. Their caller, who had been their caller for probably 50 years, he was in the Philadelphia areas where that hall is and where that club is. And Bill Dan was the caller there, and he was the premier advanced caller in that area. He did advanced and challenge. If he called a plus level dance, you were going to do some form of advanced or challenge in that dance, whether he called it directional or not. And he was known also as a call on the C1 list, and he would call it at any level. He may walk you through it or he may just call it, but you are going to hear it. So I took them over probably 7 or 8 years ago, and so I call for them on Fridays, and the club on Tuesdays that I call for with the multiple levels that we dance. So I get the call advanced every Tuesday from September to May, twice a month between September and May. So that keeps my hand in it. And I teach a plus class for one club, and I teach the beginner class for another club. So on an average, I probably call 4 nights a week, sometimes 5 nights a week.
Busy. That's very nice.
I had a streak at one point that I think I had called 14 to 17 nights, and that was a bit much. Even though I was retired, I was like, so I am trying to limit it to 4 nights a week now. But
That's a lot of material. Great thing.
The problem is now that the Sunday night club, because pretty much I call Tuesday, Thursday, Friday almost every week. So I got to fit. I only have one day a week to call for the other clubs that dance on Sundays, Mondays, Wednesdays, and Saturdays. So it becomes a juggling act at times. But
Now, would you say advanced is your favorite level to call?
yes,
Is it? Okay.
and I think it comes from back in the day of I was choreography driven. Back Joe Lane, like I told before, Joe Landy was my mentor. However, when you got to the traveling callers, Lee Kopman, who was the god of square dancing, I think is how he was referred to, and he was the higher level. Lee did not have a singing voice. He was about as monotone as could be.
Yeah.
But I think where I liked him is because between him and Tim Crawford, Tim Crawford banters with the crowd,
Okay.
like really interacts with them. Lee would just have these really funny comments, not necessarily interacting, but they would be funny. Now, I think it's all perspective. If you were a good dancer, the comments were pretty funny. If you were a weak dancer, the comments probably were not
Sure.
as funny,
I get
weren't
that.
taken as well. But probably early on, choreography wise, Lee Kopman, and there was a caller from Iowa, Dave Lightly. Once again, Dave didn't have a great singing voice, but at the advanced and challenge levels, he was just phenomenal. And I remember Bill Harrison telling a story about him, and I've witnessed it firsthand that because Dave and Bill were good friends. Dave was a firm believer that whatever level you're calling, you better be able to dance the level and dance it well. And Bill tells the story, and I was actually there, so I know it happened. It was the Star Spangled Festival, probably 1984 or 1985. Dave Lightly is in the advanced hall, packed hall, and he is just hammering away, and dancers are dropping left and right. And he basically picked up the needle. He's like, if you can't dance to level, you shouldn't be in here. And the hall pretty much dissipated, except the ones that were dancing what he was doing. And he then continued. And his wife was Ruthie, and she traveled with him sometimes, and she was at least able to keep him in check. Because she would basically go up and tell him to knock it off. But if he traveled by himself and she wasn't around, he would just go at it. So, like I say, choreography wise, I think that's why I like the advanced the best. It doesn't matter one way or the other. I really enjoy calling all the levels. I haven't called a whole lot of SSD. It is not taken off in this area.
Sure. Okay.
I'm in an area that I have a club that is, we're pretty rural down here. A club that is 25 minutes away from me. They're hanging on by the skin of their teeth. They just can't get any new dancers. They're down to about a square and a half. There's a club that's about an hour from me who I teach their class. They're right outside of Philadelphia. They're able to run a class every year and get new dancers in. And there's pretty much about 3 other clubs that are in that area, about half hour to 45 minutes, either southwest or east of them.
Okay.
And nobody wants to do SSD. And if you're a standalone SSD club, I think it's a little difficult because where I teach plus, I teach their mainstream class. I mean, a couple of years ago, I was finally like, hey, you dance every week. You would be perfect to do with SSD because they dance every Wednesday night. Their class is on Thursdays. I was like, why don't you make your second and fourth Wednesdays SSD dance, and you can keep your first, third, and fifth plus dances. That way we can graduate them at SSD. We can probably only going to run 2 classes a year, but get them in there, get people into the club. You were a CALLERLAB. I wasn't a CALLERLAB this year, but I listened to Ted do the proposal.
Yep.
And one of the things he was saying is the older dancers, and I shouldn't say old, the more experienced dancers don't like change. And we don't want to do SSD. I'm like, well, I'm not teaching 0 to plus. So how about you just go second and fourth dance be mainstream, first, third, and fifth can be plus. Well, they compromised that they were going to do, they're going to alternate tips every week. So they're just going to keep, well, kind of funny. First year that we graduated the class, they went to the dance. And they're like, well, why am I paying full price if I'm only dancing half the night?
I agree. I know.
Which is I was never a big fan of the mixed level dances. I know why we do them, but I find it difficult to get into a rhythm at time for either level because just about the time you did this tip, normally you would build upon the next tip, you're going to build upon what you did on the tip before. Well, you can't, because now you've changed levels. You could probably do it for the plus people, but they want the plus calls. They don't want you to build a tip based on what you did on the mainstream. So the club finally, they do 2 tips of mainstream and they do 1 plus tip. So they only end up doing 2 plus tips during the night, but it seems to keep everybody happy. We're as happy as people can be at times.
Absolutely. Yep.
You're never going to keep everybody happy at a dance, no matter what you try. And it used to bug me for the longest time. It used to bug me when I would make a mistake at a dance. And I've gotten to the point now that invariably I'm going to miss corners in a night. I sometimes can go 3 or 4 dances without missing them. But you know what? When I make a mistake, it's literally like, it's always nice when the caller makes the first mistake.
I
Now,
agree.
they've made a ton of mistakes at that point, but you know what?
No,
I'm confident in myself that, yeah, I'm never going to be perfect. I called a dance Memorial Day weekend down in Maryland. Actually, I would think I was telling you about the podcast that I was listening to Bill Harrison while I was driving to the dance, which was kind of near where he lives. We had 6 squares at the dance, very enthusiastic group. In square dance terms, we had younger people, which we had like some people in their 30s and 40s.
Okay. That is younger.
My excitement level, I get to the last tip, and I called the first sequence, and I'm like, they broke down. I'm like, oh, I don't understand that. That wasn't, I don't know what I called, but I'm like, it wasn't difficult. So I call the second sequence, and I think I had it from lines facing in. I called pass through, wheel and deal, centers veer right, veer left. I meant to say everybody veer left, but I said centers veer right, veer left, all 8 circulate. I'm like, you idiot. But I'm like, well, you guys are good dancers. Technically, you could have just done a pass through and that would have been the circulate. It's
Sure.
probably checking the rules a little, but it was funny. Just that mistake for the rest of the tip, I was off. I should know better. I mean, I've been doing this for 44 years. Yeah, you're going to make a mistake, but it bothered me. I mean, we did the singing call. They had a good time at the singing call. We left the dance. Everybody seemed happy, but it was just like, I know how new callers can feel if they make a mistake in the tip, that the whole world is falling apart. Experienced callers do it too. I mean, it shouldn't have bothered me. It did. Did it last very? But tip was done. Did the singing call. Lived to call another dance.
Yeah, I still, whether it be a convention or a club dance, if I miss a corner, and you're going to miss a corner. I don't care how long you've been doing it. I'll dwell on it. And I've had the Jet Roberts of the world come up and like, Charlie, the dancers have forgotten that. You missed it one time. Let it go. But it will eat at me until the next dance. It's just there. Because you put yourself at a different level. You expect more of yourself. But we're going to make mistakes. And we make, and there again, Sue, you're going to make mistakes. I'll make mistakes. The dancers won't even realize you've done it, yep. But you know it. And
unless you blatantly call something they can't do.
Yeah.
But it's funny. And I know this is one of the topics that you've talked about before. It's like probably one of the things, not specifically, but I'm probably a regional caller. I have like a radius of about 250 miles that I travel. Now, 250 miles to the east, I can't do because that literally puts me in the ocean. Miles, but northwest and south, about 250 is what I will travel.
Okay.
And it's so much easier driving the 3 hours to go call a dance because you know what? I can go in. I'm different than every other their local caller, so what I'm doing is new to them. Some of what I do is what they're going to do, but I probably have different music than them, so they're happy that hey, we get different singing calls, we get a different voice, and they're not going to see me maybe for 4 months. Where when you have your local clubs that you call for all the time.
Mhm.
And there are not many callers in my area either. So it's not uncommon that I could call Tuesday night, Wednesday night, some of the same crossover people. Thursday night at the class I teach, some of the people that literally are at class, my Tuesday night club and the club on Wednesday, help teach at the class on Thursday. I could do a Friday, which some of them are then, they go to the advanced club that I call for, and you may get a Saturday. So I could literally call to them 4 times in 5 nights or 4 times in a 2-week time period. And I really try to be cognizant, at least on uh, singing calls,
Mhm.
not to do the same ones over again.
Sure.
Pattern records, I'm not so much that. And I'll talk to the dancers and I'm like, well, do you remember what singing calls I did last night? No. So when they hear it, they may know it. But I think the dancers, for the most part, I mean, they don't want to hear the same songs every time. But if you got a couple hundred songs on your computer, and a couple hundred songs is probably small for most callers. I think I'm singing calls. I think I got about 250, and I think I got about 130 pattern records.
Okay.
But I find myself, there's probably, of the singing calls, there's a core 100 that are the ones that I use the most.
What's some of your favorites?
Right now, I'm on a Morning Sky kick. I like that.
Okay.
Uh, this year I got Rose Garden on a
Oh, nice. Throwback.
like that.
Yep.
I kind of like the songs that the dancers can sing with a lot too.
Yeah, I agree. Yep.
Burgers and Fries is one of my favorite singing calls, and that was literally one that I started doing back in probably one of the first 10 singing calls I've done. It was on Wild West Records. Larry Jack had done it. And have you interviewed Corbin, guys from
Yes.
Central Pennsylvania?
Yes, I did.
Corbin just re-released that song with the same music. So I was finally able to get an MP3 of it, not my, as best as I could clean up, record that had been played for 30 years before recording it.
Yeah, Corbin's an awesome dude. I've never met him before,
Me neither.
but I'd heard about him, and so we met online just like this and started doing some podcasts. And awesome guy. Love what he's got going on. He's been overseas for I think damn near 3 weeks or to a month, calling, and so with the handy capable stuff, and that's just amazing. So Burgers and Fries. Now, with you being a choreography guy, what's some of your patter songs you like? Patter music.
I am absolutely horrible at the names of songs.
No, I agree. It's tough on some of the pattern music. It really is.
I within the past year, I picked up, I think it's on ESP, it's the Lone Ranger.
Yep. Okay.
It's a good, like, last song of the evening. I have a lot of ESP pattern records. I like their pattern music. I have a lot of Riverboat, fair amount of Royal. There's one song, I think it's on ESP, called Loop De Love, which is I'm a creature of habit, that is kind of like the singing call, the pattern record that I will start most dances with.
Okay.
I don't use a whole, I think I probably have about 2 pieces of music that would be like unconventional square dance music. At one point I was using it a little more, never really got into it a whole lot. I'm of the philosophy these days that none of the square dance labels are making any money. They're producing records.
It's tough, I can tell you that.
I mean, I remember when you used to have the records, square dancers used to buy the records. So you would go to a national square dance convention and they would have record dealers there. And hell, if Ken Bauer was at the national and he did a singing call that they liked, they would go buy his record. They'd probably have him autograph it. I actually, I have 2 autographed records, and the first one was called My Way by Frank Sinatra. Dick Bayer, a caller from Michigan, did it.
Nice.
It's
Okay.
on Bren Music. And it was the second singing hall I ever learned to do. And he was doing a festival in Philadelphia area, so I actually took the song to him and had him sign it. And I still have the record these days. And then the only other record I had signed is one of the local callers, Joe Fioretti, who he lived up in Tom's River. He was just a bundle of energy. He called for the 4-H kids for years, and he wasn't a choreography master.
Right.
He was such a good personality, and there was no way that you could not have fun at one of his dances. He would go around and make sure he probably kissed every girl, every woman in the hall, would shake the hands of everybody in the hall, and he was just a vibrant person. And he put out a singing call, which I can't remember the music, music, music. So I actually have I don't even know what label it's on, but I have a signed copy of that also. Well, funny story with Joe. I met Joe in 1981 at Caller School. My first Caller School was with Al Brundage, Earl Johnston, Clint McLean, and Sheldon Lehman. Sheldon was a local caller to Virginia. Al, Earl, and Clint were the Northeast callers. And I think Ken actually bought their caller school, or the rights to their caller school, when he purchased it, I think in the 80s. So I met Joe there the first year, and he called in the 4-H. So my sister knew who he was because my sister danced in the 4-H program. So back then, Joe had he was the kid caller in the area. And he wanted to get rid of that reputation. So he's like, Mark, will you take over my 4-H club? I'm like, sure, no problem. It'd be a great experience. At this point, I've been calling just under 2 years when I took it over in September of 82. Now, I am the polar opposite of Joe Fioretti in every aspect.
Okay.
I am, as my wife says, when you're talking about square dancing, you can talk a lot. Other than that, you don't say a whole lot. Pretty reserved for the most part. Choreography was my niche. Could have cared less if I did any singing calls. So I go my first night to take over Joe's class. Now, we're dancing 7 squares of 4-H kids in 1982. I am only 18. I am still in 4-H. So I am the polar opposite of Joe. I am not the vibrant, I'm not talking to everybody in the hall. So I had a rough first 6 months up there in transitioning. And what would make it even worse was that Joe taught his adult class maybe 10 minutes away from where I was teaching the 4-H kids. We danced from 7 to 9:30. His club was from 7 o'clock to 9 o'clock. He would get home. He would then drive over to the 4-H building where we were doing the class. He would walk in at like 9:15. Kids would literally run off the floor while I was calling to go to him. Like, so it got better. Finally, one night we had did a demo at the Ocean County Mall for the 4-H club did a demo, and Joe and I were doing the demo. And then Joe went on to do a barn dance that night. I go with him to the barn dance. I swear he's got 40 squares of people there literally in a barn.
Mm-hmm.
And he's just the perfect person for it. We go to a local drinking establishment afterwards and probably have too much to drink. But luckily we weren't very far from his home, so I slept over at his house that night. We get up the next morning, we start talking, and it just went. We started talking about the 4-H club, and I was basically saying how it's very difficult you coming in here and all the kids running off the floor, a lot of yada yada. I have 7 leaders in the club that literally they go in and sit in the office or the kitchen, actually it was, and do nothing for the 2.5 hours except BS with each other because they were used to Joe running everything. I'm like, I am their age. They aren't going to listen to me. And literally, I'm a hired hand. I'm the caller. I'm not the leader of the group.
Right.
So we got into a pretty good argument over that. Not a fist fight, just a verbal argument. Because
Right.
Joe would have crushed me if it was a fist fight. He was a high school wrestler and pretty darn good. So I finally storm out of his house. I drive home. Apparently, he calls my parents to warn them. He's like, he's probably not going to be in a very good mood when he gets home. So we go back to class the next Monday, and I taught the class from I think 7 to 8:30. And I'm like, I need to have a meeting with the leaders. So a couple of the other kids, I'm like, just put on this music, dance in the singing calls, you guys entertain them. And I went in, we closed the door, and then I had it out with the leaders. And only one leader was finally like, yeah, we really should probably be doing more out there. So things changed at that point, and my life calling for the 4-H people for the next 3 years got exponentially better. But it was just, like I say, they were looking for fun. They weren't looking to be challenged choreography. Now there was a component to that because back in the day they used to have a square dance competition for the 4-H clubs. So they would hire one of the local callers in the area, and like we took 7 squares of kids to this square dance competition, and they did all kinds of different levels. They had pretty much, you'd have the singing call division, which literally whatever figure was on the singing call was what got called. You just danced to that. And then they would have whatever levels we were dancing. I think at that point we had mainstream and plus. But generally the competition, it was challenging and fast. So we used to we would graduate in May, and then the summer we would practice every week for 2 months, like every conceivable thing that you could come up with that they may or may not call. And that was fun. And you had a bunch of all the other counties in the state, their groups would go there too. So all the kids would get to meet each other. And the nice part with the 4-H program and the kids was that each county sponsored a dance. Like we were Ocean County, so we had the Spring Fling. So we did a dance from like 2 o'clock to 10 o'clock, and there was a spaghetti dinner at the dance. One of the other clubs did the Thanksgiving dance, while the other ones did Hunterton Hayshakers. They did the Valentine's dance. And you would have the 4-H callers would call, and then anybody else who wanted to call would call at it. So it was kind of like a mini festival for the 4-H kids. But at that point you're getting 20 squares of kids together. That's pretty cool.
I wish we had those kind of numbers again. That's amazing.
Yeah. I mentioned a while ago about the mini fest that I had done with Tony and what I learned. Well, did that with him the first time. I think we had 50 to 55 squares dancing. I think we did it the following years. It was up to 65. It was literally a basketball court going north and south. And then you had the basketball court on an angle that came to a 45-degree angle with it. And pretty much that whole gymnasium was filled. But what I remember Tony did the one time, I think he did the singing called Beautiful Noise, and he's notorious for doing that.
Yep.
And he starts off normal, and by the time you get to the middle break, he starts turning down the volume. And by the 4th figure, literally, he's calling and the people are just shuffling. And to hear 65 squares of dancers just shuffling to the beat of that's not even to the beat of the music, but just shuffling as they're dancing. And then, of course, he gets to the closer and he just cranks it up. And he's such a talent.
Yeah, he is. He is for sure. We never really got into it too. And you said typically 250 miles is a good radius for you. What are some of the venues that stick out to you in your 44 years that you called in?
There was one, it's called Nottingham Ballroom. It's actually it's a firehouse, and then they have a catering business attached to it.
Nice. Okay.
So the ballroom would probably hold close to 40 squares, wood floor, big stage, and that was the location that any big dance that was going to be held in the area, that's generally where they would hold it. So I remember Marshall Flippo used to go there the Friday after Thanksgiving every year, and he would pack the place. And there was a club called Liberty Stars that used to run a dance called Salute to America every year. And it would always be the Sunday after the Wasca Festival, which was one of the premier festivals in Washington, D.C.
Right.
Pretty much, you've interviewed a lot of the people that have done that festival before. So they used to bring in 2 of the staff callers for that every year to do the dance. So the place was packed. Then they started it being 1 staff caller and 1 local caller. So I got the honor or privilege of being the local caller
Nice.
to get to do those dances every year. So I got the call with Jerry Stories and Joe Saltels and the Tim Mariners and the Tim Crawfords and Steve Coppins and you name it. Sometimes I got to do multiple dances with them. Towards the end, Jerry Story and Tim Mariner were the 2 that they brought up quite often, and it's Tim Mariner was such a showman, such a great singer.
Yes.
Thoroughly enjoyed working with him. Then I did a lot of them with Jerry, and different type of showman.
Yep.
He is. His energy level is just phenomenal, and he paid me what I took as a great compliment. He came up. He's like, you're pretty good. Can I have one of your cards?
Wow.
And I thought that was pretty nice coming from him.
That's fantastic. It is.
So I became a Jerry Story junkie, and during COVID, CALLERLAB used to do the Corona class.
Learning. Yep.
Yep. And he did one on choreography, and I'm just sitting there like in awe. I can't take notes fast enough. I think I emailed him during the presentation as to how much I was enjoying it, and he actually got back to me, and he had done a whole bunch of stuff, choreography from like Right Hand Lady Box, Get Outs, and all that. So he sent that to me. I mean, he was just fabulous. I wish I could call with him again, as do probably many other callers, and which actually brings to me one of my favorite singing calls is you probably know the history of it because you're friendly with Tony. Jerry and Tony used to do the singing call, Don't It Make You Want to Go Home?
Mhm.
Like in the 80s, they closed out every dance that they did.
Wow.
Like a Paylocks or whatever. And after Jerry passed away, Tony re-released the song as a tribute to Jerry. They did a YouTube video of it, and then he did the song also. And I mean, it just talking about it gives me chills. The hair is standing up on my arms. And like I say, I knew Jerry a little more than Tony. I've worked with Tony probably about 6 or 7 times, but never really talked to Tony. Like where Jerry, I had a lot of conversations with him during the dances and all that, but just to watch them. I've never danced to the 2 of them in person, but just to watch them on YouTube.
Yeah.
They finish each other lines. They've been doing this for so long together. They're kind of like Tom Miller and Bill Harrison.
Sure. Absolutely.
I mean, they just do so much together. Jerry and Tony were just the 2 of the best. And
there's a video on YouTube of Jerry and Tony doing Little Devil at Pride at the campground that is probably one of the best singing calls I've ever heard. Versions of it. I mean, it is just phenomenal. And it's just the two of them at one of their weekly square dances at Pride, and somebody got it on video, and it's just amazing. It's Little Devil. Um, Tim Mariner, and I know you've watched several of my podcasts. He taught me to dance 30 years ago now. My son's 33. He taught me when my son was 3. Awesome guy, and the personality that he brought to it was just amazing. Tim Mariner, and again, these guys, I got into it late. I got to meet Jerry at the Atlanta National Convention at the GSI school. So I never had the opportunity to dance to him or to work with him. Tim Mariner, that was one of my goals when I first started calling, and I took a couple of schools from him. I was like, man, one day I want to do a dance with this guy. And of course, that just never panned out. So you never know.
Here's a little story too. It's a silly thing. I was doing a dance with Jerry, probably March of 2017, because I think Tim passed away in 2016.
Mm-hmm.
And I had been watching YouTube, and I think in 2016, Jerry and Tim had done the singing called Steel Rails on Royal.
Okay.
At Wasca during the Die Hard, and just to hear the two of them do that was fantastic. And I had the singing called Steel Rails, so when I did the dance with Jerry the following March, he's like, well, what do you want to end the dance with? I'm like, how about Steel Rails? He's like, I'm not sure I can do that, because it was literally, that was the last time they had seen each other at Wasca. And then, so he's like, I'm not sure I'm going to be able to get through this, but we'll do it. And he got through it, but he was a little emotional through it. And it's just a testament to professionals respecting other professionals.
That is a great story. Gosh.
Here's another, and this is where, like, I think it's so great to call with the big name callers. I'm never going to be one of them. I can hold my own to an extent, but they're better than me. I know that. I am what I am. And I was doing a festival 2 years ago, and Jen Roberts was on staff, Joe Saltel, Tom Miller, and then they had 5 area callers, and I happened to be one of them. So Sunday morning, we pretty much, there's not much of a program going on. It's like everybody's there. Tom Miller, I think, was supposed to be pairing us up, but it got to the point that we did a tip, and then somebody else did a tip, and Jet and I are standing around, and we're chatting, and we had talked throughout the weekend, and I took this as a big compliment also too. I was calling in the advanced hall, and he had come in, and I had finished up my hour, and he's like, well, that was really good, because material flowed well together. I liked your music. It was challenging, but you didn't crush them. He goes, great job. I'm like, well, thank you. Once again, means a lot to a local guy.
Sure, absolutely.
He didn't have to say that. So we're doing this festival together, and Sunday morning, and Jen and I are talking, and no one's getting up to call. And he's like, well, why don't we call together? I'm like, don't have to ask me twice. So I got to do it with him, and then we did the singing call Morning Sky. And I can carry a tune. As I say, you don't want to go listen to me in concert by any shot of the imagination, but generally I can stay on key, and I am a great follower. But generally, anytime that I work with any of the bigger name callers, I do my thing. They're the talented ones who can harmonize and all that. They're just going to jump in and out and all that. So kind of when I did Morning Sky, Jet let me do all the openers, and then he would just do what Jet does. And he's such a talent. He reminds me a lot of Jerry Story. Just that high energy level.
Yep.
Great choreography.
Personality, amazing. Yep. That's awesome.
And I enjoy hearing other other callers, no matter who they are, because I think all of us callers have a lot of our own material, but we have borrowed a lot of material from a lot of other callers over the years.
Absolutely.
And you may call it stealing, I
Research.
call it research, and everybody else I think calls it research too. And it's not like you're necessarily you don't do it verbatim, but it's hey, that's a great idea. Like one of my favorite get outs is, and it's one that I cannot set up. I just, when I see it, I know it. But I like having you be in partner lines, and I like calling pass through, wheel and deal, and the outside couples sweep a quarter.
Okay.
And that'll get everybody home. And generally, depending on how good of dancers they are, depends on how many hints I'm going to give them. Like if I do a DBD dance, I'm not giving them any hits. They can just figure that out. But I may say, okay, who's the original side couple? Because they're the ones that are actually at this point are on the left end of the line. I'm like, okay, when I say outsides, that's who I'm talking to. Or I'll say it's side sweep a quarter. Or I'll say, who's the couple on the left? Good. Just start looking for your home spot when you do this. And I'll call it, and that generally, if I give them that hint, generally they will get there. But I mean, I never thought of that. I don't, someone else came up with it, but I saw it, I liked it. I could not tell you how to do it. I can just I can see the floor and I can resolve. I am not much of a module caller.
Just all sight.
First tip is quasi module. Like I know enough that I can, because especially if I'm going into an area that I've never been to before, it's okay. We'll do stuff that, okay, it's going to zero out, invert, rotate, get them moving around, but I'm gonna do what I know. After that, I'm pretty much sight call for the most part. And I know that one of the callers came up to me at one time. He's like, "Well, how do you set that up?" I'm like, I kind of just I see it and I know it. I don't really have like one of my favorite get outs at the mainstream, although it's tougher at mainstream, but it's just basically swing through, all eight circulate once and a half, right and left grand. And if I get really lucky, if I have them in the right spot, right and left grand is going to get them to home.
Right.
Like I say, I quasi know how to set it up, but it's normally I can just look at it and say, okay, well, my primary man is looking at his partner, and we're in an across the street box. So if the number one man's on the outside of the square, I know from there if I call swing through, all eight circulate once and a half, boom, I have my get out, everybody's in sequence, and life goes on for another day. But how to set that up, I could do it if I was moving people around, but it's going to, I see it, I do it.
No, I mean, it is a talent just to see it. It really is. And some people can, some people have to work at it. And it's a struggle for some. And
Yeah, I know that
there's certain nights I'll see things set up and other nights I don't. So it's hit or miss. But go ahead.
Well, when I first started learning how to call, taping callers was the big thing. You'd go to a dance, you ask the caller if you could tape them, you bring your tape recorder, boom. And I don't think I ever came across a caller that said, no, you can't.
Right.
So I always had tapes in the car listening to these guys call. And I've been very fortunate that I'm a very visual person. So when they're calling, I can see what they're doing, even when they start going crazy. Sometimes if it's a choreography driven dance or whatever, I can see it. And not everybody can do that. But I'm the person that I would be probably horrible going to a national because I'm so reliant on sight calling that for me to go in there, and it's probably what, a 6-7 minute tip that you're doing, maybe 10 at the most.
Yeah, roughly.
I would probably struggle if I had to do 5 minutes. of modules. I'm not sure. I'm not sure how interesting it would be. I would probably hope that I found a really good square quickly while I was calling that I said, hey, I can trust these guys and go. But one of my favorite get outs, uh, it's basically it's like the all eight circulate once and a half right and left gram, but this is it's a all eight circulate once and a half slide through and you should be home.
Okay.
And I it's an easy one to set up because literally it's a if you have them at a true corner box, you invert and rotate with basically star through, pass through, bend the line, pass the ocean, all eight circulate once and a half, slide through, and you should be home. And it's such a neat thing. But I know that if I try to just sight my way through it, I know it's basically a corner box half stirred. So the number one couple is where number three is.
Right.
I know that, but getting them there doesn't necessarily work. But if I basically just, and I generally won't call star through, pass through, bend the line, I'll do something leading up to it, make it a little go. But it's just the little things that, listen, I probably stole that from somebody else too. It probably wasn't my idea, but it's not like they told me how to do it. I still had to figure it out.
Yeah, no, you see it. There's nothing wrong with that. That's just research. That's what that is. So, very nice. Before we end, I want to say I was digging around. You can't see it on here, but I've got a record that Tim Mariner, about 4 months before he passed away, he signed for me. I went to one of his schools, and then that got me on a kick. And so I've got a handful of records now that everywhere I go, if I go to a convention, I go through my old records because I've got boxes of them. And I've got Charlie Robertson's autograph on one. I got a couple of Tonys that he signed. Unfortunately, not in time to get Jerry's.
Right.
But so I got a Wade Driver one last year at CALLERLAB. I was super jacked about that. That was great. Mark, we've been going about an hour or so, brother. You've got way more stories. I would love to do this again.
Oh, it'd be my pleasure.
This was a good time. And I tell everybody when I started doing this, it was to tell your story and then talk about stuff that you've done. And it is that, but it also turned into a caller school for me. And so I go back and I get these get outs that you're giving and all that because it's just research. And so, man, this has been a learning experience for me. Love to talk to you more. You've got so much experience and you're a choreography driven guy. And that's one of the things I struggle with. I love doing singing calls. I've gotten to where I like choreography now because, that's what people hire you back for. The singing calls are great, but there's a lot of people who can do singing calls. The choreography is where you start to separate yourself.
And sometimes you have the bigger name. Sometimes it's a combination of the two. I find, and I know we've already gone way too long, but
no, that's okay. Go ahead.
Most of the dancers don't want to be challenged, so they're very happy for the most part doing things from a standard position. Dancers like to succeed. Took me a long time to figure that out, but luckily I figured it out soon enough that I've at least for the next 25 years or so, it's been a whole lot better than the first 13 or 14 or 28 or however long it is. But it's got to be a win-win. They have to be happy. They want to come back to you. Even if you're calling just a standard position dancing, but just doing some things that are a little different. They're like, wow, this guy's really good. And they'll come back. If you break them down constantly, they're like, you could have the best singing voice in the world. And they're like, yeah, I'm not going back to him again.
I agree. Mark, it's been my pleasure, brother. Want to do this again pretty soon. Yes. I would love to hear some more stories and talk more about calling. You've got the choreography, and that's what I'm looking for, brother. Mark, it's been my pleasure. This will be out in a couple of weeks, and I'll look to meet you somewhere down the road, whether it be at a convention or something.
Well, I am hoping to make CALLERLAB next year, so I'll look for you.
That'll be a good one. I'll be there, sir.
Nice talking to you, Charlie.
Have a good night, buddy. I'll see you.
Take care.
All right. Bye-bye.
Sides face, grand square, I said Lido. Whoa, whoa. He's for the money, he's for the show. Lido, Allen and Lipton, we the line.